basically the principle of what I call a good country is a country that does exactly that, that manages to harmonize its domestic responsibilities with its international responsibilities. And this is absolutely essential because the big challenges that we're all facing today, mainly climate change, but many, many other challenges as well, like migration, like organized crime, like human rights abuses, like illiteracy, like overpopulation, and so on and so on. 20, 30, 40 of these big, big challenges, all of them are too big for any one country to solve on its own. Therefore, we must cooperate and must collaborate. That must become the default behavior of all governments, to collaborate first with other countries and then compete on top of that if they want to. And you can mix cooperation and collaboration. Of course you can. Industry has been doing this since the 1970s. The problem is that countries are still configured in the way they were in the 18th century, as competing, warring tribes who are trying to seize advantage over each other. And this is absolutely suicidal behavior. So my simple diagnosis to solve all of the problems we're facing in the world today is that we have to change the culture of government worldwide from fundamentally competitive to fundamentally collaborative. And the biggest problem we have with our politicians is that they are not internationally minded. Almost none of them. They focus, even the ones who we don't call populists, even the ones who we regard as being more intelligent, more wise, more grown up, more long-sighted, more disinterested, still they are 99% focused on domestic issues. When Donald Trump says America first, he's only speaking for the heads of state and heads of government of every country on the planet. It's also China first, it's also Britain first, it's also Guatemala first. And that's fine and that's logical. Of course you put your own country first, but it doesn't mean that every other country has to come last. You can mix those two. And what I spend my time doing is to try to encourage governments to understand that this is not about charity, this is not about self-sacrifice, this is about enlightened self-interest. If governments cooperate and collaborate more with each other, they can produce better policies, domestically and internationally. And that's the change we need to make. This kind of politics is, of course, not new. And it's an approach which humanity feels attracted to on a regular basis. Every 2 or 3 generations throughout history, people go crazy about the idea of looking inwards instead of looking outwards, and in many cases looking backwards instead of looking forwards. That doesn't mean that we can ignore it. It doesn't mean that we can be complacent about it, but it is something that has happened before. The last time it happened in a big way was in the Second World War, and it caused enormous amounts of damage and loss of life and loss of property, and the consequences lasted for a very long time. So we need to be very careful about this. I think there are 2 reasons why populist, nationalist politicians take this approach. One is probably frustration with the way that their own jobs and their own responsibilities have changed as a result of globalization. They call themselves, and we call them, policymakers, but increasingly governments in the age of advanced globalization don't get to make very many policies. They're just having to manage enormous international forces over which they have very little control. And so I think partly this nationalism and populism is a personal response to their own frustration about their own inability to actually do politics. These days, I mean, my day job is I'm a government advisor. I've advised the governments of 50 or more countries over the last 20 years. And so many of them say to me, it seems that our job today is just public relations. We don't actually get to do strategy. We don't actually get to make very many policies. As governments, most of our concern is how do we tell the population what's going to happen? We don't control it. This is a shame because the reason they don't control it is their own fault. It's because they still have a national perspective. They still think that an individual country and its individual government with its individual sovereign power can somehow have some kind of influence or impact, but it's just not the case. The only way that we can achieve impact or influence over the system is by countries working together, collaborating. And yes, that does mean saying goodbye to a tiny little bit of your sovereignty, but it's necessary. The other reason I think why populist politicians take this approach is because it's very easy. It's so much easier to get huge, passionate support for basically quite negative messages. I think part of the problem is that we are in a period of transition everywhere in the world, at different speeds and different stages, but basically the political systems and the political ideologies which have basically maintained the system for the last 2, 3, 4 generations, they are very clearly falling apart. There are so many reasons why the system is falling apart. One of the main problems is that there are very, very few countries where we've actually got it right when it comes to bringing up a proper cadre of good politicians. Because most of the politicians that we get in, I can only really speak for my own country, in the United Kingdom, the people who go into politics are basically crap. I mean, they've been crap for generations. We haven't had serious, grown-up, intelligent, prepared politicians for 40 years. And they get worse and worse and worse with each generation that passes because we're not recruiting the right people into politics, the incentives aren't good enough, we don't pay them the right amount of money, the motivations are just not there. So the worst people go into politics and the best people go into business. And this is all the wrong way around. No, I think I failed because I've spent the last 20 years trying to encourage governments to do this in private as a policy advisor, so what you might call private diplomacy. And yeah, sure, occasionally, most of the countries I work with, they will conduct 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 policies that really are good at home and good for the world, but it doesn't change their overall behavior. It doesn't change the culture. So I've recently come to the conclusion that sure, if I was going to live to be 963 years old, and if we had that much time, then I could carry on like this. But things are getting very, very urgent. There are so many urgent situations at the moment, so we can't afford to wait that long. Which is why now I'm saying that it's not enough just for people like me to be trying to persuade governments. Somehow the people have to get involved as well. And they have to get out on the streets and they have to say to their governments, don't worry, it's okay to collaborate with other countries. We don't necessarily want to win every battle. We would like you to work together with other governments and with the international system because we care about global things too. Sure, we care about our own standard of living, but we also care about the standard of living of people in other countries. Sure, we care about pollution in our own country, but we also care about the global climate. Just to say to these politicians, don't worry, you won't be punished if you think internationally. Don't worry, we'll still vote for you. In fact, we'll vote for you more if you show yourself as some kind of international leader. This is the message we have to get across. Because the poor politicians, bless their hearts, they're worried. They're afraid that if they start focusing on international issues, then they'll lose their domestic base. People will stop voting for them. And it's just not true. All of my research shows that in almost every country in the world, there is a substantial and very passionate minority of people, particularly more and more younger generations of people, who really want their leaders to be more internationally minded, who don't want to live in a successful or competitive or strong country. They want to live in a good country and they want to work together with other people and other countries. I hope we're going to realize in time, human beings normally do realize things just in time, only just, that we really do need to start behaving differently, that life on Earth is a team sport. It's not a 100-meter sprint with winners and losers. We're all winners or we're all losers. This is so obvious to me that I feel certain that sooner or later, everybody's going to understand this and they're going to change. I feel very optimistic at the moment. I'm the only person I know who feels optimistic, so maybe I'm a lunatic, but despite all of the trouble there is in the world at the moment, despite all of these difficult situations, I do see these as being the final struggle of the old system before we move towards something more intelligent and more fair and more sustainable. It's very difficult for us to think of ourselves as belonging to a tribe that's bigger than our nation. This is the problem. People feel understandably patriotic about their own country because that's been the tradition for several centuries. And it's fine, there's nothing wrong with that, as long as you don't feel that your nation is superior to other people's nations. That's just childish, that's just stupid. But we do need to get beyond this now. I think that amazing things are happening at the moment all over the world. And I think that the coming generations, look at Greta Thunberg, you know, the coming generations are probably going to save us. The difficulty is that the kids have got the right attitude, but they don't know the solutions. The adults know the solutions, but they have the wrong attitude. And so somehow we have to find a way of collaborating. It's very, very difficult to change the behavior of adults. You know, once they're set in their ways, it's so difficult to change them. This is what Greta is discovering at the moment. You know, they're so obstinate and they're so stuck in their ways. My own view is that we need to change the behavior of humanity, and we can do that in one generation. And so there's a new project which I just announced a couple of weeks ago in Finland, in Helsinki, which is called the Good Generation. And what I'm saying with this is that we need to create a new global compact on educational values and virtues. Everybody in the world needs to get together and have a big, big global discussion and agree and say, just like we did with the Declaration of Human Rights and the UN Charter, we can do this. We need to sit down and say globally, what are the values that we all believe, whatever our political or religious or cultural or language differences may be, that we all believe that the next generation of children need to have. We sign a global compact. All the education ministers from every country on earth will sign this compact and say, these are the values that we're going to put in our educational system. And then in just one generation, we have a completely new species of human being. We have human beings who will run towards the global challenges instead of running away from them.